Welcome back. How was your Easter? It has been so long. Oh my goodness. Hope you're all doing well. I hope you had a great Easter and you guys got all those chocolates and Easter eggs that you guys were all talking about last time at our Zoom meeting. All right, so let's get started on where we were. Where did we leave off? Yes, we left off on George Washington's presidency. He's the president. And remember, he had a cabinet. Yes, he had a cabinet of men that helped him make these decisions. And we have our chart right here. Very quickly, we'll go over. Can you see that? There we go. Okay, so our first one is right here where we had Thomas Jefferson. He's the Secretary of State. He was in charge of making sure that the countries got along with other countries. Then there was Alexander Hamilton. He was the Secretary of Treasury. He was in charge of the money in our country. Then there was Henry Knox. He was the Secretary of War. He was in charge of our military. And then finally there was Edmund Randolph. He was the Attorney General. He was in charge of making sure that people followed the national law. So that was the cabinet that George Washington had set and made. Oops, sorry. For all those people. Now, why did they choose the name cabinet? Did George Washington want to put all of his helpers in a cabinet where cups and saucers go and close the door? No, that's not what he wanted. Cabinet is actually an Italian word, and what it means is a small room where you can discuss things and nobody can overhear you. Nobody can listen in on what you're saying. Nobody can eavesdrop. Now, do you think these men had lots of things that they needed to talk about? Yeah. Do you think they wanted everybody hearing what they were talking about? No. Do you think they had very big decisions to make? Definitely. And do you think they agreed all the time? No. Remember we talked about the banks? They didn't agree with the bank. So there's lots of things that they didn't agree on. So they had disagreements and discussions and things like that. Do you think they wanted everybody hearing all that stuff? No. They wanted it just so that they could sit down and talk about their ideas. So that's why they had a cabinet. They call it a cabinet. So it is a room where people can get together and talk about things without other people listening in. All right. So today we're going to learn about even more disagreements that they had besides the bank. We're going to learn about disagreements between the government and the people, the government and other countries, and the government and the Native Americans. So we're going to learn about how some of that all went down, how all that played out. Now, our government was back then, it was definitely concerned with the cities and with the trade and with the banks. But there were other things that it was concerned about. It was concerned about its people and its country and how the people were doing and what they were doing and if they were, living happy and doing the things that they should do. So our government was also concerned about the people. Now remember, we only have 13 states just right there on the edge by the ocean. There's a whole lot of space in the rest of the country. But right now, we're only living in those 13 states. And they're not giant states. They're kind of small states. And more people were moving into these states and living in there. Well, the people living there, some of them wanted to get more space. They wanted to move out. So they wanted to move west into places that were not states right now. Now, the problem with this was, who's already living there? The Native Americans are already living in that space. So do you think the Native Americans wanted them coming over? No, probably not. So to show you, here's our map. Let me get that in there so you can see it. Here, let me turn this light off. Oops. There, a little bit better. Okay, so remember, we are living, or the people are living right along this here. Okay, this is all the states right there. Well, they wanted more space, so they started moving west. Now, out here is where the Native Americans lived, but this is all where they wanted to move to. So the government decided that they were going to divide all of this land up into equal parts and then sell it to the people that were moving out there. Now, the settlers didn't like the idea that they were going to have to buy land. They thought, if nobody's living on it, why do I have to buy it? And another issue that they had was George Washington didn't want to upset the Native Americans. So his plan was to move west slowly and in a nice plan. Well, the settlers, they weren't patient. They didn't want to wait. They wanted to move out on their own right away. So they did. So they started moving out to the west. Well, this is where the Indians were. Now, the Indians and the Native Americans were using this place for crops and for hunting. So the Native Americans did not want the settlers to come out. In fact, many of them wanted to fight the settlers because it was their land and they wanted to keep their land. But the settlers wanted to keep on going. In fact, one of the settlers that you may have heard about is Daniel Boone. Okay, Daniel Boone. I have a couple of facts about him I wanted to read off to you. They're really kind of cool. Daniel Boone grew up in Pennsylvania. He had 10 brothers and sisters. That's a big family. His father owned a farm, and he learned how to become a farmer. Well, when Daniel Boone was 13, he got his first rifle, and he became the hunter of the family. So he was the one who would go out most of the time and hunt for the family so they had food. He learned many survival skills from the Native Americans that lived around him. And in 1751, his family moved to North Carolina right before the French and Indian War. Do you remember that French and Indian War? That happened a long time ago. That happened back in chapter 1, way before George Washington was president. We kind of learned a little bit about that back then. He fought in that war. And when that war was over, he and his family moved to Kentucky. Now, going from North Carolina to Kentucky, nowadays, it's kind of easy. We have cars, we have fast cars. It only takes a couple of hours to get there. Back then, it would take days to get there because the only way to travel was either on foot, on horse, or by wagon. And there were no roads. All you did is just get out there and start walking or riding on the grass, on the rocks, on the dirt, on the soil, on the hills. There were no roads to go. You just went. It's almost like walking through a park, except you had to do it the whole way across the state. So there were no roads back then. That's one of the things that Daniel Boone found is on his way traveling to Kentucky, they found a place called the Cumberland Gap. And what that was a nice passageway to get through an area. Now, once they got to Kentucky, it was almost time for the Revolutionary War, and guess who fought in the Revolutionary War? Yep, Daniel Boone. So he fought in the French-American War and in the Revolutionary War. That was a lot of wars he fought in. Now, after the Revolutionary War was over, things became very hard for Daniel Boone and his family. Because remember, they were in the Indians area. They didn't want them there. So the Native Americans would continuously, on a regular basis, come and attack them. Finally, Daniel Boone and his family moved away from that area and moved up to Missouri. All right, so now back to George Washington. Remember, George Washington didn't want to upset the Native Americans. Well, neither did Mr. Knox, the Secretary of War. They didn't want to bother the Indians. They didn't want to upset them. They didn't want to take their land away. In fact, Mr. Knox even said, they were here first. This is their land. They didn't want to push them away. But the settlers didn't listen. They kept on going. So the settlers would go out, they would pack up their stuff, and they would start going. Now, think about this. You've got the settlers going as fast as they can out to the west. They're going into the area where the Native Americans are. The Native Americans don't want them there. So that started fighting. Okay, fighting started breaking out between the Native Americans and the settlers. Here's another thing. Did you know the British are still around. Even though the Revolutionary War is over and we got our freedom, they're still there. In fact, they still had some forts in the places where these settlers were trying to go to in the west. Do you think the British wanted the Americans to have that land? No, they didn't. So you know what they did? They started making trades with the Native Americans. They started giving the Native Americans weapons to fight the settlers with. So not only do the settlers have that they're trying to get their land and they're having arguments with the Native Americans, but now you have the British who are giving the Native Americans weapons to fight the American settlers. It was a whole big mess, and there were just all kinds of problems all over. So President Washington knew he had to do something. He's the president. It's his job to take care of the people in the country. So this is what he did. He found Anthony Wayne. Okay? He chose Anthony Wayne to make an army. All right, so Anthony Wayne was asked by Washington to make an army to help him with this problem between the settlers, the Native Americans, and the British. And guess what? He did. So he became a general. So General Anthony Wayne gathered up his troops, and they found a spot where the British and the Native Americans were at, and it happened to be at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. There was a place called Fallen Timbers. They had a battle there. So they named the battle Battle of Fallen Timbers. And General Anthony Wayne saw them there, found the British and the Native Americans. And in this battle, he defeated the British and the Native Americans. So General Wayne was able to defeat them and stop them. He stopped the British from bothering the American settlers that were going out. And when this happened, because the British stopped and let the Americans have the land, for some reason Spain did the same thing, because Spain was giving some of those American settlers a problem too in moving into their land. So once British backed away, so did Spain. So the American settlers had more places to go. Now, when, let's see, our government, the big government, the national government we have, has a big impact. It helps the people a lot. But do you know something that helps the people even more? Not just the national government, but the state and local government. All right, so the government that's in your state and the government that's in your city. And that's what we're going to talk about now on this chart. So we have types of government. There's 3 types of government. There's the national government, which is with the president and about covers our whole country. Then there's the state government. The state government is just what our state is. So what is our state? Florida. So the state government would be the government of Florida. Then we have the local government. The local government is the city that you live in. So the local government takes care of the city and makes up that takes care of the people in that city. Now, we have the national, the state, and the local government. Now, each one of those has a branch of government. Each one of them has an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. So in the national government, in the executive branch, you have the president. In the legislative branch, you have the Congress, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then in the judicial branch, you have the courts, the Supreme Court. Well, guess what? You've got the same thing in the state and the same thing in the local, except they have different names. So the executive branch in the state government is our governor. Okay? So the governor is in charge of the state, and our governor is DeSantis. He is our governor right now. Now, the legislative branch for the state is called the legislature. And it's a lot like the House and the Senate. They work together to help make the laws for the state. Now, the judicial and the judicial, that's a hard word to say. The judicial branch in the state is the same. It has the courts. Now, for the local, the executive branch in the local is our mayor. So whoever's in whatever city you live in, whoever the mayor of your city is, that is the executive branch in the local government. Now the legislative, the ones who make the laws in the local, are the city councils. They come up with the laws. They'll come up with laws about how fast you can drive in their city streets, what time the parks open, where you can have a baseball park, things like that. They come up with those kinds of laws, all right? That is the local legislative branch, is the city. Now, the judicial branch for the local government is the same thing as the courts. So, we have the national government, the state government, and the local government. And each one of those has an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And these are the names of the parts of their government, okay? Because, you need to remember this because we're going to talk about it. It's going to be part of your worksheet today, all right? One more thing about this. When we have a problem, let's think. When you have a problem with your neighbor, all right? Let's start with that. When somebody bothers you or two people have a dispute and they can't solve it, they go to the local court. They go to the local judicial branch and they go to the local court. Well, if they can't fix it here, then they go up to the state court. and they try to fix it. If they can't fix it in the state court, where do you think they go? Exactly. They go up to the national court. So this is where you always start out with problems you might have when you have to go to the court and have a lawyer. If that doesn't work out, then you go to the next level, which is the state. Then if that doesn't work out, you go to the next level, which is the Supreme Court up in the national level. So that's how that works. All right? Okay, so a few more things. We talked about the settlers that were moving west. Well, here's the thing. You don't have a state and local government unless you're in a state. You have to be in a state to have a state government and to have a local government. So these people that were living in these 13 states and wanted to move west, they were moving away from the state. They were moving out of their state. So they were moving to a place that didn't have a state or a local government. They were leaving this whole part behind. They were moving to a place called a territory. Okay? A territory is land that is owned by the national government, but does not have a state or local government. So there wasn't anybody there to help make the laws or to help enforce the laws for the state and local. So they had a lot of work that they needed to do. They had to figure out how to get along on their own without a state and local government. That's kind of hard to do, but a lot of them figured out pretty well. Now, eventually, all of those territories that these people moved into in the West, they all did become states, because that's how we have all 50 states that we have. They kept becoming states and becoming states and becoming states. Once they became a state, then they had their state and local government. Okay? All right, so our big idea, we have a couple of them. They're all here. I had to write them on here today because we had so many of them, or at least they were long ones. So the couple of big ideas we need to get from this is, number one, the national government did not want people moving west as quickly as they did, but the people didn't listen. They moved anyway, and it did cause some problems. The second thing is, the government had to intervene and tell Great Britain, which is the British, to leave them alone. Because remember, because the people didn't follow George Washington's plan on moving west, they decided to do it on their own. It caused a lot of problems, and the government had to go in and fix it for them. Another thing was, the settlers who moved west no longer had a state and local government. They had to figure out how to get along without it. And then finally, General Anthony Wayne defeated the British and the Native Americans in the Battle of Fallen Timbers. That was a big battle right there, because that told Britain and the British people to stop, to move out of our way and let us move. And it also let the Spanish people know, in Spain, to let Spain know to move out of the way so we can move into areas too. And that's the beginnings of how we started moving west. Okay, so for your paper for today, this is, there we go. I think you can see it pretty good. There we go. This is the paper that I want you to do. And again, you do not have to print this out. You can just write it. You can list national government, and what are the three names for their, not the three branches, not the names of the branches, but the names of the people that are in those branches. So for the executive branch, who is in the national government for the executive branch? The president. Who is in the legislative branch for the national government? The Congress. It's right down. So you can see right above the paper up there on the board. Who is in the judicial branch for the national government? The courts. Now I want you to do the same thing for the state governments, right there. Who is in the legislative branch? Who is in the executive branch? And who is in the judicial branch of the state government? And same thing for the local government. Who is in the executive branch? Who is in the legislative branch? And who is in the judicial branch for the local government? All right? So you can, and if you can't print this out, that's fine. Just write national government on the top and then list the three. Write state government and then list the three. And then write local government and then list the three. And then you can take a picture and send it to us. All right, guys? Okay. Again, if you have any questions, you can always email us and let us know. And I hope you guys are doing well. And my goodness, it has been such a long time. I miss you guys so much. I look forward to our Zoom meeting that we're going to have for my class tomorrow. All right, guys. Bye.